Welcome back, Fragrance Fiend here today, wrapping up 2024 with one of my most important videos yet. Season 1, I covered my first original signature scent, Minotaur by Paloma Picasso, followed by Fierce by Abercrombie & Fitch, which was less of a signature scent and more so something which intrigued me into the fragrance world. And today covers the fragrance which changed it all for me. And of course that is none other than Silver Mountain Water by Creed, the eau de parfum citrus woody scent released in 1995, alongside Milsim Imperial. So if you're a regular viewer and you want to know a little bit more about my backstory and how I got into fragrance, feel free to watch the next few minutes, otherwise skip to here to get right into the review. So a few years ago I was getting into fragrance and all I really knew was the designer world. Nobody really cracks onto the niche world until you get a little bit tired of everything that gets mass produced and everything begins to smell somewhat the same. So how I found this scent literally leads me back to my first signature scent, Minotaur by Paloma Picasso, which was originally worn by David Bowie in the early 90s, someone who I was and still am a massive fan of. So I knew he wore Minotaur, but I did a tiny bit of research to see potentially what else he may have worn in the past. And that actually led me to an article of an interview with a member of Arcade Fire who once met Bowie and went on to say how he was the best smelling man he'd ever met. This was still after doing quite a bit of digging. There's even resources which say that the scent was actually inspired by David Bowie or created specifically for him, which has never been confirmed by the brand nor him. Which led me to my next mission, to smell Silver Mountain Water. I then discovered there was only one official retailer in the entire state that actually sold it, and after a bit of disappointment after going into the store and trying out all the bottles, they were all empty, there was no sales rep, so somebody else came across and asked if I'd like to smell anything. They actually had a secret batch of testers locked away, and little did I know at the time after going into this store and smelling a single fragrance how much of an impact it would have on my entire life. So they took out the bottle and sprayed it on my wrist, and it blew my mind in ways beyond comprehension. Hours into the day, I would keep going back to my wrist, smelling it over and over and over, and not even knowing that much about a top, heart, and base or a dry down. It was like the scent just continuously evolved into something even better. And as the scent began to escape my skin over the progression of the day, I kept trying to smell my wrist over and over, trying to get that feeling of smelling it for the first time over and over again. So about a week would pass and I would go back into the store, spray it again, and fall in love with it all over again. This would be a bit of a repetitive process over the course of quite a few weeks. I think the staff even began to think that maybe I was planning to steal it. Then after discovering the price, this is something I thought I would never own in my entire life. It just seemed absolutely ridiculous to pay that amount of money for a bit of scented alcohol, was my previous logic. Then after doing more research online, I obviously fell in love with the branding and the prestige of Creed. I'd go into the store, I'd spray a bit on my wrist, and people would compliment me on one spray of Silver Mountain Water. Then as some time went by in one of my previous careers in the entertainment industry, that started to slow down a bit and I got an opportunity to be the doorman slash greeter at this retailer, which was over the Black Friday period, and I was literally stationed in front of the Creed store, welcoming shoppers in, which is something I never did before. And with the Creed counter right across from me, I was topping myself up every chance I could get. And through this opportunity, I managed to get it at a better price. And that's when my obsession would spiral into the point now where I don't even know, I can't even count how many niche fragrances I have, when only weeks prior I could not even imagine it. So the description seems to be ever-changing with the brand. Now on the website it says, an invigorating breeze of fresh, icy, mentholated mountainous air. It brings to life the pristine beauty of Switzerland and their breathtaking alpine region. What has changed quite a bit though seems to be the note breakdown. Here's a few examples from different websites with completely different note breakdowns, and even the official Creed website doesn't even have the notes on there. So I have no idea what Creed are doing at the moment or why they're being so inconsistent. From a local Australian retailer, the note breakdown suggests in the top you have Bergamot, Blackcurrant, Galbanum and orange with a heart of tea and an Ozonic accord. Lastly with a base of Musk and Sandalwood. For some reason I recall mandarin instead of orange. The tea I believe used to be labelled as green tea, and now on some sites the Blackcurrant's in the heart or there's lemon added. Even Aventus has a very different note breakdown compared to a few years ago. So for those batch junkies, my batch is A3521N01. So it's actually been quite a few months since I've last sprayed this. Every time I spray it, it gives me a hit of nostalgia. This is obviously the plastic cap variant. Just smelling the cap, it just radiates that energy and joy. Hold up, I actually forgot a very important part of the story. I discovered Sillage by Armaf. I actually bought that first, hoping I could recapture that same energy, but it failed to do so. Even my unskilled nose back then could still tell the difference apart massively. There's just something about raw natural ingredients opposed to the synthetic chemicals which are often used by Armaf. Wow. So it does capture everything that I recall, but it has aged just a bit from my nose. There's honestly not a more crisper, fresher fragrance I've smelt thousands, and nothing sends the same signals to my brain which just make it tingle the same way this does. I think I do even recall petitgrain being in Silver Mountain water, but I could be incorrect. Other than crisp and fresh, the only other word that comes to mind is natural. This just smells so pure, like a cocktail, which you could also say the same about with Virgin Island water. But the Bergamot has that right amount of crispness to it. It's not overtaking the fragrance, it's just giving you enough to balance out with that very ripe blackcurrant. I've reviewed a few blackcurrant fragrances previously where they just dominate the fragrance, but this one is just so beautifully blended, aside the hint of orange and the Galbanum. For me, it really is that tea note which creeps in quite early from the heart. This, once again, smelling so incredibly natural. There's so many other fragrances I could throw onto the bus which smell so cheap and terrible with that tea and bergamot combination. And then you have that Ozonic accord which gives this fragrance its mystere and wow factor. I understand early batches of Silver Mountain water used to be described as quite inky, like yes, literally a leaked pen. And to be honest, that's how I actually recall my early days of smelling Silver Mountain water for the first time. It was quite inky. In fact, as a few minutes begin to pass, that inkiness does come back, alongside that subtle musk and the sandalwood which comes from where I am, Western Australia. Throughout that dry down, each step is quite definable. The first few seconds smell completely different to the first minute, to the next 10 minutes, and the next hour, and so on. It really is one fragrance that is capable of covering all grounds, from a professional setting to a personal one to a fun day out. And I don't know if it's just because I've gotten to know the fragrance a little too well or not, but it used to feel like a fragrance which was just catered to a very specific personality. Now I feel like it's a little more accessible to more people, maybe because I'm so used to wearing it. That's the only factor which has kind of lost a tiny bit of the spark for me, is that it's not necessarily the same way I view it as I used to, but that's probably because I've discovered a bit more of a wider palette. Nevertheless, it is still my favorite fragrance of all time. The part which lingers the most to me is definitely that Ozonic note in the tea. It kind of goes hand in hand with the dry down, and the musk is honestly quite subtle compared to some of the other creeds. The sandalwood actually has a tiny bit of a sharpness to it, but that's balanced out by the softness of the musk. Even though fragrances like Santal 83 or WD-18 by another do use the same sandalwood, it really smells like this has a whole other character of its own. Now comes the part I feel absolutely nobody will believe me, and that's the projection and longevity. So many people who've reviewed this fragrance over the years have commented on the poor performance, suggesting it doesn't last more than 1 to 2 hours. I can confirm with 100% honesty the longest time this has lasted on my skin is 13 hours. Remember, I used to wear this fragrance every single day. I went quite anosmic to it in the early days, and then I'd put it on some days, I would stop smelling it, and I would time it over and over and over again just to see how long it would truly last. And one day I went an entire day without smelling my wrist at all, and still being able to capture it after the 13-hour mark. And I've done this test with other people who even knew the scent and said, yeah, that's Silver Mountain water, did you just spray it an hour ago? Remember, this is my personal experience. It has worked very well on my skin in the past. On an off day, maybe I'll go anosmic to it after 4 hours, and other people will be able to smell it on me from 6 to 7 hours onwards. I naturally also have quite a high body temperature, so I do radiate scent quite a bit. But instead of skin, do the clothing test as well. The natural oils will cling to the clothing a lot longer than on skin, which will either be absorbed or evaporate at a quicker rate. Now comes the price. I remember buying mine for $4.39, and I believe the 30ml was about $3.20. Let's have a little look what it's at now. This is not acting, by the way. I seriously do not know the price. So the same website which also carries a lot of the grey market, a local chemist which I won't name, is listing it for $349 for 100ml. But if I go to an official retailer, it now costs $479 and $369 for 50ml. So quite a bit of a steep jump in the past year or two. This was originally the fragrance that I was going to wear for life. Every time I ran out, I would swear that I would buy a new bottle. And I've actually been really conservative with this, and I feel like I've probably got about 25% left. And I can assure you now that I'm probably not going to buy a bottle of this within the next 5 years, especially if it keeps rising at this rate. And because I have a pretty large collection at the moment. I get for the quality of the natural ingredients, it does cost quite a bit to be able to maintain that, but again, Creed has copped a lot of flack with recent batches and their quality production issues. I honestly wouldn't even know the half of it. I've tuned out of all that drama. But to be honest, when I smelled most of the range going back 2+ years ago, they didn't necessarily have any performance issues for me. Everything I tested was at least average or above average for the concentration. I own Viking and Royal Oud. They last 12 hours and beyond. I also have Green Irish Tweed that lasts a solid 10 hours or so, and Milsim Imperial, which does not last whatsoever. But with current health and safety regulations in the industry, it's hard to really beef up a fragrance and keep it somewhat natural while keeping those nasty preservatives and chemicals which can cause long-term health issues at bay. And as the fragrance suggests, it's unisex, which I totally agree with. I think it's 50-50. I think the packaging could use a tiny bit of an overhaul. I mean, look at brands like Xerjoff and what they're doing. Or even Wilhelm, which have quite a nice glossy finish on the front and textured padding on the insides. The plain cardboard box doesn't really do a whole lot for me. So to me, this fragrance gets a solid 10 out of 10. Obviously, I'm partially biased because it had such an impact on me, but to me, you really cannot top it. The quality is also another 10 for smelling so natural, evenly blended, and having a very distinguishable dry down. As for performance, yes, it's not going to stay in your clothing for days. On the skin, as I mentioned, my longest recorded wearage was 13 hours. And this has 100% lasted so much longer than a lot of my previous reviews of well-established brands. Compare like a $440 Byredo or $300 MFK. And for that extra $100, I'm getting a tiny bit better performance than, say, fewer things from those brands. As for everything else, the bottle feels absolutely incredible with a high quality atomizer, everything I've listed before. The only thing that actually loses a few points, I guess, would be the current price tag, and maybe a tiny bit off the packaging as well. So that's pretty much for this video, this season, and this year. I want to thank everyone again for watching and supporting my channel. Let's bring on season 3. It's going to be a big one.